Hello, hello. For this video, we're going to be looking at ways of categorizing higher level thinking. But first, let's just take a look at what regular old thinking is. So thinking is any time that you are manipulating information in your memory. So whether you are transforming it or just simply going over it in your mind. Now, let's refresh ourselves when it comes to the memory model. So over here with short-term memory, you probably recall that this is also called working memory, and this is where thinking resides. So what is it? Whatever is in your head right now is in your working memory. Whether that is that you're thinking about the memory model, or if you're simply thinking about where you want to order pizza from tonight. Now, most likely in your future classes, you're going to want your students to think a bit more deeply than they do about pizza toppings. So what about deeper thinking? We need to try to understand what are these levels of higher thinking and how can we ensure that we're covering this in our classrooms? Which leads me to this question. So how can teachers do this? How can we make sure that our students are truly thinking deeply in our classes? Well, one of the tools that we use for doing this is Bloom's Taxonomy. This was created by Benjamin Bloom in the mid-50s. He had a team of researchers who, one of the many things that they did was examine high school exams and looked at the different types of questions. And they were able to come up with a way of classifying cognitive skills to try to delineate the degrees of difficulty. We're going to be going through these, but first I want to point out that there are actually two different models. This is the original version from the 50s. Now, when you go to search for Bloom's Taxonomy online, half of what you find is going to be the old model. We are going to be focusing on the newer model that was revised in 2005. Just to compare the two, the first three levels are the same. The synthesis and analysis have been kind of combined into analysis in the newer model. Evaluation is the same, but there is a new top to the pyramid, which is creating. So we're going to go through each one, starting at the bottom and working our way up, which means we are starting at remember. So remember is simply looking at your ability to recall. So similar to if I tell you the definition of a term, can you tell me that definition back? The level of remember is almost like parroting information back. So simple recall, simple recognition. So here's just a general example that you might see in a classroom. So on an assessment, students are given a multiple choice question and they're asked to recognize a definition that they were previously given in class. Usually at this level, things are written almost verbatim or word for word from your notes or from the lesson. Now, after we go over these example slides, you're always going to see a slide like this. Here I'm going to show you a pop culture video example that kind of relates to the level. And over here is a list of verbs. In your notes, you should jot down some of these verbs or an example to really help you better understand each of these levels. From Pirates of the Caribbean.
Parley! Parley. I invoke the right of parley. According to the code of the brethren set down by the pirates Morgan and Bartholomew, you have to take me to your captain.
I know the code.
If an adversary demands parley, you can do them no harm until the parley is complete.
Places with the code. She wants to be taken to the captain. And she'll go without a fuss.
So you can see in that example, she is able to cite the definition of parlay. They identify what parlay means, but it does appear to be at that simple level of remember. All right, so next up we have understand. So understand is looking at, yes, do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Do you comprehend? Can you put it in your own words? Can you explain what this means down here? So the facts that you've been given, don't just spit them back to me. Can you show to me that you know what they mean? So here's our example. So for instance, in a biology class, you are given the description of a fictitious animal and you need to explain whether the animal could survive in a given ecosystem. That would show that you could understand that based upon the traits, the characteristics of the animal, and based upon the characteristics of the ecosystem, what kind of a match they would have. Okay? More than just repetition. And the clip is from Friends here.
Look, I studied karate for a long time. And there's a concept you should really be familiar with. It's what the Japanese call unagi.
Is that a kind of sushi?
No, it's a concept.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's freshwater eel.
Unagi is a state of total awareness. Okay? Only by achieving true unagi can you be prepared for any danger that may befall you.
You mean in case someone's trying to steal your bamboo sleeping mat or your kettle of fish?
All I'm saying is, it's one thing being prepared for an attack against, like, each other. Whole nother story being prepared for an attack. I don't know, like, surprise!
So again, that's just getting at the point. So you can see that Ross obviously understands what unagi means and he's trying to explain it in his own way to the girls. Our next level is apply. Apply is this idea, can you take the information and either use it in a different way, in a different circumstance, or can you execute a skill that you have learned? Okay? So for this instance, students are asked to examine the information about a car crash and determine which, if any, of Newton's laws apply to the situation. So again, that idea of taking something you've learned and relating it to a different example. Now, it can also explain whenever you can demonstrate a skill that you've learned, and that's going to be what we see in our next video clip from Harry Potter.
One of the wizard's most rudimentary skills is levitation, or the ability to make objects fly. Do you all have your feathers? Good. Now, don't forget the nice wrist movement we've been practicing. The swish and flick. Everyone? Swish and flick. Good. Oh, and enunciate. Wingardium Leviosa. Off you go then.
Wingardium Leviosa. Wingardium Leviosa.
Wingardium Leviosa.
Stop. You're going to take someone's eye out. Besides, you're saying it wrong. It's Leviosa, not Leviosa.
You do it then if you're so clever.
Go on. Wingardium Leviosa.
Oh, well done. See here, everyone. Miss Granger's done it.
So you can see, obviously, Hermione was the one who was able to apply it. And I thought this was just kind of funny because it's a good reminder that not every single lesson, every single item that we learn in school are we going to be able to apply all that well, such as perhaps playing the recorder. But still, we should try to show where we can apply these concepts when possible. Here's just a fun example from Westerville Schools. So the zoology teacher is having the students, work with an aquarium and take care for fish until they're big enough to be released into a pond. And there's a lot of hands-on application-based lessons to be learned there. Our next level, and remember we are increasing in difficulty, is analyze. And you might also recall that from the previous model, analyze is a combination of synthesis and analysis. So this is looking at, can you break something into its parts to explore it more deeply? And also, can you put it back together and synthesize it? It can include compare and contrast, all kinds of things. And So if you want to relate this to a classroom example, perhaps you'd have your students read the results of a scientific study and find supporting statements for each of the conclusions or findings. So go to the conclusion and then go up above and try to find where the statements are that support those items of the conclusion. And we have another Harry Potter video here.
Harry, tell me again.
Come seek us where our voices sound.
The Black Lake. That's obvious.
An hour long you'll have to look.
Again, obvious. Though admittedly potentially problematic.
Potentially problematic? When's the last time you held your breath underwater for an hour, Hermione?
Look, Harry, we can do this. The three of us can...
And it cuts off there a little bit short, but I think there are a lot of moments in Harry Potter where they are needing to analyze clues or analyze what the next step is that they need to do, and so that's just one brief example of that. All right, moving on up, we have evaluate. And evaluate used to be the top of the old pyramid. Now it's close to the top. So evaluate is this idea, can you defend your point of view? Can you make a conclusion based upon evidence? So it's not just that idea of making a judgment of saying I like that or I don't like that, but it has to come from experience as well as reason. I like this one. Read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. To weigh and consider is to evaluate. Can you think of an example that a teacher might be able to give that would help students learn to evaluate? It's an important skill, and to be honest, it's one that we don't really do enough in the classrooms. I realized this once I got to graduate school because so many of our assignments were about judging research articles and giving our educated opinion on things, and it was something that truly I had not practiced previously. So here's one potential way of doing it. Read an article about a famous athlete. Identify one piece of information in the article that fails to support the author's case, that hard work was the main reason for the athlete's exceptional athletic skills. So you can have them read articles and try to find inconsistencies. And here's an example from Princess Bride.
What you do not smell is called iocane powder. It is odorless, tasteless, dissolves instantly in liquid, and is among the more deadly poisons known to man. All right. Where is the poison? The battle of wits has begun. It ends when you decide and we both drink, and find out who is right and who is dead.
But it's so simple. All I have to do is divine from what I know of you. Are you the sort of man who would put the poison into his own goblet or his enemy's? Now, a clever man would put the poison into his own goblet because he would know that only a great fool would reach for what he was given. I'm not a great fool, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. But you must have known I was not a great fool. You would have counted on it, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me. And you must have suspected I would have known the powder's origin, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me.
You're just stalling now.
You'd like to think that, wouldn't you? You've beaten my giant, which means you're exceptionally strong. So you could have put the poison in your own goblet, trusting on your strength to save you, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. But you've also bested my Spaniard, which means you must have studied. And in studying, you must have learned that man is mortal, so you would have put the poison as far from yourself as possible, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me.
You're trying to trick me into giving away something. It won't work.
It has worked. You've given everything away. I know where the poison is.
Okay, so it's a silly example, but you can see he is definitely evaluating the situation. He is weighing it. He's trying to come up with a judgment or a decision. And our very last one is create, to come up with new ideas. I love this idea of this being the top of Bloom's pyramid. And so this is the idea. Here's just one thing you can do, having students brainstorm. So here they're brainstorming reasons for a problem and generating suggested solutions. There are so many ways you can apply this to a classroom.
What?
Nothing. It's a card from my dad.
What is it? Wait. Dear son, happy Festivus? What is Festivus?
It's nothing. It's
When George was growing
Jerry,
up,
no.
his father hated all the commercial and religious aspects of Christmas,
Yeah.
so he made up his own holiday.
Oh, and another piece of the puzzle falls into place.
All right. And instead of a tree, didn't your father put up an aluminum pole?
Jerry, stop it.
Then weren't there feats of strength that always ended up with you crying?
Can't take it anymore. I'm going to work. You happy now? The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people. Now, you're going to hear about it.
Okay, I love Seinfeld, so I couldn't help but to add this one. So the creation of Festivus would fit at the top of this. You can have students create their own game given a variety of sporting equipment, create their own holiday, create their own coat of arms or their flag for a make-believe country. Here's just one instance. So this is one from a school in Columbus where they had students choose a painting from an art exhibit and then write a poem about it. And what a lovely way to mix different subject areas. Here's another one. So this is where they had first and second graders found their own countries and they had to create their own flags and start to draft a list of laws. And there are so many ways you can get your students to create through their research projects, science fairs, even creating a piece of music. All right, so how do teachers use this? How is this a benefit to us as teachers, and how does this help us in our classroom? Any ideas? Well, if you're thinking about lesson plans or learning objectives, you're on the right track. So it is used by teachers to create learning objectives, and you'll find that whenever you go to write lesson plans and even in your future professional development workshops, you're going to hear Bloom's taxonomy come up a lot. But we do also use it to guide our test writing. So when you're writing exams, you want to make sure that you're covering a variety of levels. In fact, one of Bloom's studies found that 95% of test questions at the high school level were at the knowledge part of Bloom's taxonomy, the very bottom of the pyramid. So you want to make sure that when you're writing your exams, you have a range of questions. And speaking of which, you want to make sure that throughout your course, throughout the school year, that you're utilizing the full range of Bloom's. Not every lesson, not every single day, but think about where can you try to bring in these higher levels. Usually you're going to see that more in your projects and assignments. Okay, so why do I have this picture up? That change is inevitable. In education, you're going to find there's always a new initiative. And one of the newer initiatives within this world is Webb's depth of knowledge. It's not even in many of our textbooks yet, but it is something that schools are talking about right now. They're having teachers do workshops on this. They're having teachers revise their assessments using this. So let's talk about it because this is in your future. So it is another framework to try to look at rigor in your classes. You can see it is relatively new. And it came out of the alignment of standards to assessment. So when all that work was being done, depth of knowledge was created. So let's talk a little bit about the process out of which this arose. So while looking at the connection between standards and assessments, they were realizing that standardized tests, what they truly measure is what you know about your content and the procedures that you've learned. But these standardized tests didn't really measure things like how deeply you understood the content, your ability to really explain your answers and apply things and so on. They weren't really looking at higher level types of skills that we just covered. So this is Webb's depth of knowledge. I have included it in your fill-in notes. We're going to go through each of these 4 levels rather briefly. I'm going to use a video to explain them, and I also have provided some information for your fill-in notes. So let's start at the lowest level.
Level 1. Recall and reproduction. The first example of recall and reproduction would be to identify the steps in the water cycle. Students may simply fill in a worksheet on the steps. The next example is having students recognize the definitions of various terms. So imagine students completing matching item questions.
And you can see that's fairly similar to where Bloom started off. The idea of can you simply recall information that has been taught previously. Let's look at Level 2 and see some examples.
Level 2, skills and concepts. So the first example would be maybe analyzing the cause and effects of weapons advancement. How did tanks impact World War II, for example? The next example would be maybe to compare viruses to living organisms. Are viruses living organisms? What do they have in common? What is similar? What is different?
So here, you're taking the information that you've learned and you're using it to either answer other questions or to accomplish a task. Let's move on to 3. And here we're going to see some examples in the video.
Level 3, strategic thinking. Argue using evidence that is cited. You would want your students to cite the evidence as they perhaps debate or have classroom arguments. Next, hypothesize the next steps in an experiment, where students have to strategically think. Another example would perhaps be explain how parts of a mechanism work as a whole, where students have to imagine how each individual part has an effect on all other parts.
So I see this level as being similar to analysis and also having a bit of evaluation in there as well. The idea of being able to really reason about the information and explain your conclusions. And then finally, the 4th one.
And the last level, level 4, which is extended thinking. And the first example would be creating a nutritional video on the best choices for healthy living. This is a project where students have to create and combine a number of different skills. Next up, make connections across different content and subject. This will relate to cross-curricular instruction, integrating different subjects such as math
and here you're really going beyond the information that was learned and trying to either think about, all right, after reading a research article, what might be the next step in this field of research? How might they do the research differently? Create your own research project and so on, to really moving past what was taught. So in terms of comparing the two, Bloom's is better when it comes to measuring your instruction, your lessons, writing your objectives, and just simply looking at plain old cognitive rigor. But most educational researchers do think that depth of knowledge is better when you're just looking at assessments. When you're trying to go through your exams and your assignments and things, that depth of knowledge might be a better tool. And I think that's why we're starting to see it used more in schools. Okay, so that's it for Bloom's and for depth of knowledge. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time.